So imagine you have this massive multi-billion-dollar energy corporation,
Right.
and they're rolling into a small rural community.
Yeah, we see this all the time.
Right. They show up with heavy machinery, these legions of corporate lawyers, and just a massive budget to, extract resources or build infrastructure.
And usually in that classic David versus Goliath scenario, the local community just gets run over.
Exactly. I mean, they might get a few temporary low-paying jobs or like maybe a newly paved road out of the deal.
Right. But the vast majority of that generated wealth just simply evaporates. It bypasses the local economy completely.
Yeah, it gets funneled straight back to corporate headquarters.
Mm.
But today, we are taking a deep dive into a scenario where the local community doesn't just absorb the impact.
They fight back.
They do.
Yeah.
They have built this impenetrable, highly sophisticated legal framework to ensure the wealth stays exactly where it's generated.
It's really fascinating.
It is. We are exploring the world of Tribal Employment Rights Offices, or TERO. And to understand how this works, we are pulling from a really interesting stack of primary sources.
We've got a lot of good stuff today.
Yeah, we have the comprehensive legal ordinances from the Pawnee Nation and the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, which we will just refer to as the MHA Nation.
Right. That's a bit easier to say.
Definitely. We are also looking at these national FAQs from the Council for Tribal Employment Rights, along with career services documents from both the Cherokee Nation and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians.
And you know what's really striking about these documents from these tribal nations is that they show us the actual mechanics of inherent sovereign power in action.
Yeah.
Like, they detail how Native American tribes are reclaiming economic opportunity and enforcing employment rights. It's not just a legal exercise.
Right. It's a deliberate strategy.
Exactly, to build long-term community wealth.
So I was reading through the Council for Tribal Employment Rights documents, the C-tier stuff, and this massive legal question just immediately stood out to me.
Oh, yeah? Which one?
Well, if you picture a non-tribal company, say like a massive Texas-based oil firm setting up operations on tribal land, you would just naturally assume standard federal equal opportunity laws apply, right?
Right, that would be the assumption.
Yeah, so it seems like prioritizing only Native workers would be a direct violation of, like, the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
I just couldn't figure out how a tribal government could legally force a private, non-tribal corporation to completely bypass federal anti-discrimination laws.
Well, that tension right there, that tension between federal employment law and tribal preference, that is the foundational concept of TERO.
Really?
Yeah. The Council for Tribal Employment Rights addresses this directly by pointing to the inherent sovereign status of tribes.
Okay.
It's a fundamental principle of Indian law, and it's heavily supported by this landmark 1974 Supreme Court decision called Morton v. Mancari.
Right, Morton v. Mancari. The C-Terry FAQ emphasizes that the Supreme Court classified Indian preference as a political preference rather than a racial one.
And that distinction, that changes absolutely everything.
How so?
Well, in Morton v. Mancari, the Supreme Court ruled that because tribes are separate political entities, they're recognized in the U.S. Constitution, and through hundreds of treaties, granting an employment preference to a tribal member is not a racial classification based on Native American ancestry.
Oh, wow.
Right. It is a political classification granted to members of a federally recognized sovereign government.
So if you think about it like a sovereign nation issuing its own strictly controlled work visas, it makes perfect sense.
That's a perfect analogy, actually.
Because if you want to do business within the borders of a sovereign country, you have to abide by their internal labor laws, which, usually prioritize their own citizens first.
Exactly. And because of this political distinction, tribes operating on or near their reservations are legally exempt from Title VII and several other federal employment regulations.
That is wild.
It is. And if you look at the historical context provided in the C-tier sources, the concept of Indian preference actually first appeared in federal regulations way back in 1834.
1834? Wow, that's early.
Yeah. The explicit goal was an act of self-determination, right? To eliminate historical barriers and address the severe poverty and unemployment on reservations.
Right.
The legal theory treats the tribe not just as a demographic group, but as a governing body with the authority to mandate economic fairness on its own soil.
Okay, but holding a Supreme Court victory from 1974 doesn't automatically force a modern construction firm's HR department to hire locally today.
No, it definitely doesn't.
Right, the legal theory has to be, like, weaponized into daily paperwork. And when you look at the Pawnee Nation's TERO Act, you see exactly how they convert that sovereign right into this inescapable day-to-day operational framework.
They really do.
Yeah, they use this strict system of tiers and fees to mandate compliance.
So let's talk about the Pawnee Nation's tier system. It's basically a meticulous hierarchy for awarding contracting bids.
Yeah.
It dictates the exact priority order for any covered project happening within their jurisdiction.
Right, so if you picture yourself as a contractor trying to win a bid, this tier system operates like an incredibly exclusive VIP access list.
Pretty much.
So Tier 1 is the absolute top priority. To qualify as a Tier 1 contractor, you must be a certified Pawnee business, and your specific Pawnee business must actually perform 50% or more of the work.
Right, you can't just pass it off.
Exactly. And if no Tier 1 business bids, then it moves to Tier 2, which covers other certified Pawnee businesses.
And then Tier 3 opens up to any Native American-owned business, but there's a catch there.
What's the catch?
They have to commit to using Pawnee businesses for 50% of the subcontracting work.
Ah, gotcha. So it still circles back to the Pawnee Nation.
Exactly. And this priority list steps all the way down to Tier 5, which is where a standard non-native business finally gets a shot.
But even then, there's a condition, right?
Yeah, they have to commit to subcontracting half the work to a Pawnee business.
That contracting hierarchy ensures that the prime dollars stay within the community. But, TERO doesn't just regulate the massive contracting companies. They regulate the hiring of individual workers on the ground, too.
Yeah, both the Pawnee and MHA Nation ordinances utilize this mechanism commonly referred to as a hiring hall or a skills bank.
But the 72-hour rule in these documents is just fascinating.
Well, the 72-hour rule is huge.
Yeah, an employer who wins a contract cannot simply bus in their entire usual crew from out of state.
Nope.
Whenever a vacancy opens up on that project, the employer must officially notify the TERO office.
And they are legally required to give TERO 72 hours, so 3 full business days to search their skills bank and refer a qualified native worker.
Wait, so they really have to just pause and wait for 3 days?
Yep. Only if TERO fails to find a qualified candidate in that window is the employer allowed to hire a non-native person for the role.
Wow. It forces the corporation to interact with the local labor pool before looking outward.
Exactly. But implementing the skills bank, managing that whole tier system, and policing the compliance of these multi-million-dollar projects.
Right.
That requires significant administrative overhead.
Right, which brings up the employment rights fees outlined in the Pawnee documents.
Yeah, let's talk about those fees.
They look essentially like a tax levied directly on the project. For a massive construction or oil contract of $15 million or more, the fee is 1% of the total contract.
Which is a chunk of change.
Yeah. And for smaller projects under $100,000, it jumps to 5%.
Right.
So if you are a massive energy company looking at these numbers, the immediate assumption is that the heavy administrative burden of a 72-hour hiring delay, combined with a 1 to 5% gross fee on your contract, would destroy your profit margins.
You'd think so.
Yeah. You would assume these companies would simply refuse to operate on tribal lands.
But the math actually works out differently when you factor in the jurisdictional realities.
How so?
Well, according to the CTRFAQ, the national average TERO fee sits around 2.5%.
Right.
If that same company were operating just outside the reservation boundaries, they would be subject to standard state taxes.
Oh, right.
And those state taxes often range from 6 to 10%.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, because tribal sovereignty allows these TERO regulations and fees to preempt state taxation on reservation projects, contractors frequently operate at a lower overall cost burden than they would off-reservation.
Oh, wow. So they're essentially operating in a discounted tax environment, even after paying the TERO fee and complying with all the hiring delays.
Exactly. The financial environment actually benefits the contractor, but it is uniquely brilliant for the tribal government.
Right, because the fees generated from these contracts don't just vanish into some general fund.
No, they are earmarked to directly fund the TERO office itself.
That is so smart.
The corporations extracting the resources are literally financing the salaries of the tribal compliance officers, the maintenance of the skills bank, and the localized training programs.
It creates a completely self-sustaining regulatory operation.
Exactly.
But, because TERO creates such a lucrative, legally protected, and somewhat discounted environment for certified Native-owned businesses, human nature kind of guarantees that people will try to exploit the rules.
Oh, absolutely. Whenever there's money, there's a loophole someone's trying to jump through.
Right. Like if I am an unscrupulous contractor looking at the requirement to be 51% Native-owned to win a bid, My first instinct is to just find an enrolled tribal member, put their name on my LLC documents, give them 51% of the shares on paper, and then operate my business exactly as I always have while I pocket the profits.
Yeah, and the MHA Nation explicitly recognizes that exact threat in their oil and gas regulations.
They do.
Yeah. They note that if the preference system is abused by fraudulent companies, it actively undermines the entire economic development strategy of the reservation.
That makes sense.
Because of this, TERO offices operate less like standard HR departments and more like aggressive forensic accounting firms.
Yeah, they are ruthless about tearing away the facade of what they call bogus businesses. You can't just hand someone a 51% share on paper.
No, not at all.
The MHA documents detail a real value rule. The native owner must provide real value in the form of capital, equipment, or real property that is commensurate with their 51% ownership share.
Right. The regulations explicitly state that a native owner cannot simply buy into the company using a promissory note to their non-Indian partner.
Yeah, so no IOUs.
Exactly. You cannot just be a figurehead. TERO evaluates these companies through a very strict fitness grading system.
What does that entail?
They audit the corporate structure to see who genuinely controls the daily operations. They check the titles of the heavy machinery.
Wait, they actually check the titles on the dump trucks?
Yes. If a company claims to be native-owned, TERO demands proof that the actual dump trucks and oil rigs are financed through conventional banking or a legitimate capital lease in the name of the native-owned firm.
That is incredibly thorough.
They review the resumes of key personnel and ensure the insurance policies are held by the native entity. They are actively hunting for fronts.
And the MHA Nation defines a front as an enrolled tribal member who, for a fee, uses their Indian preference status on behalf of a non-Indian entity.
Right.
They also heavily police brokers and bid shopping.
Oh yeah, bid shopping is a big issue.
Like a native-owned firm cannot win a lucrative contract using their Tier 1 preference, only to secretly subcontract the entire project out to a non-native company for a fraction of the cost, and then just pocket the difference as a broker fee.
No, you are required to be a self-performer.
Right.
But this rigorous enforcement presents a practical challenge.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
Due to historical redlining and the complex legal status of tribal trust land, it is incredibly difficult for native entrepreneurs to secure conventional bank loans.
Oh, that's a really good point.
So if a native firm legitimately lacks the massive capital or industry experience to start out as a self-performer on a multi-million-dollar oil project, how do they participate without violating the rules against front companies?
Right, because they need the capital, but they can't just be a front. The MHA Nation actually solves this through preference partnership agreements, or PPAs.
Right, yes.
A native firm can form a joint venture with a non-native firm to gain access to that crucial capital, mentorship, and bonding capacity.
But TERO heavily regulates these joint ventures to ensure they don't just become permanent crutches or disguised front companies.
Yeah, they don't mess around.
A PPA requires the submission of a strict, detailed business plan demonstrating exactly how the non-native partner will transfer their knowledge. And most importantly, the agreement must include a total buyout plan, mandating that the native firm will completely buy out the non-native partner within 10 years.
Wow. And if the joint venture involves leasing equipment from the non-native partner, the maximum duration for that lease is just 2 years.
They are structurally forcing the training wheels to come off.
Exactly. The tribe is using the non-native company's capital to build their own capacity and then basically showing them the door.
It's brilliant. And if an employer attempts to bypass these fitness tests, front company rules, or hiring mandates, the enforcement mechanisms are severe.
Oh yeah, looking at the penalty section of the Pawnee Nation Act, if a contractor violates the compliance plan, the fines start at $500 per day.
Per day. That adds up fast.
Yeah. For repeated or more egregious violations, they escalate to $1,500 per day. TERO also has the unilateral authority to completely shut down the contractor's operation on tribal land.
And Section 29 of the Pawnee Act outlines the ultimate leverage.
What's
If a violating party refuses to pay the assessed damages or fines, the TERO Commission can petition the tribal court.
Okay.
And the court can order the tribal police to physically confiscate the violator's property. We're talking heavy machinery, vehicles, equipment, and hold it.
Wait, they can just seize an oil rig?
Yes. If the violator still refuses to comply within 30 days, the tribal police have the authority to literally sell the confiscated corporate property to satisfy the fines.
Wow. The forensic accounting, combined with the threat of asset confiscation, ensures the perimeter is tightly defended.
Extremely tight.
So the tribe utilizes Supreme Court precedent to legally force corporations to hire locally. They capture the wealth through a strict tier system and project fees, and they aggressively root out any non-native entities trying to siphon that wealth through bogus front companies.
Which leads to the most important question of all.
Right. What happens to the money and the job opportunities once they're successfully secured for the community?
Exactly. And when you analyze the documents from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, or EBCI, and the Cherokee Nation, the function of TERO undergoes a massive shift.
It really does.
It pivots from strict corporate compliance and forensic accounting into profound grassroots community building.
Yeah, this shift fundamentally changed how I view these offices. Reading through the EBCI documents, TERO stops sounding like a labor compliance office and starts sounding like a comprehensive social safety net.
Definitely.
One of the most striking examples is the Mothertown Healing Program run by the EBCI TERO.
The Mothertown Healing Program bridges the gap between labor compliance and social work. It is a program specifically designed to assist EBCI-enrolled members who are currently in recovery from substance use and abuse disorders.
That's amazing.
It provides a safe, highly supportive working environment, offering job skills training and the structured discipline necessary for individuals to successfully re-enter the workforce.
My initial reaction was just total confusion. Like, why is a department that spends its morning regulating multi-million-dollar corporate oil contracts and auditing heavy machinery leases spending its afternoon running addiction recovery programs?
Right, it seems completely disconnected at first glance.
Nah.
But the answer lies in the philosophical bedrock of these tribal laws. The very first line of the MHA Nation's TERO Ordinance states, "Economic insecurity and unemployment are a serious menace to the health, morals, and welfare of the nation."
Wow.
The tribal governments deeply understand that mandating jobs through a legal loophole is useless if the population cannot fill them.
That makes total sense.
If you force an energy company to hire locally, but your local labor pool is struggling with the fallout of generational poverty, untreated addiction, or a lack of basic education, those mandated jobs will just remain empty, and the wealth will still leave the reservation.
Yeah, you can't just open the door to employment. You have to ensure your community is physically, mentally, and educationally equipped to walk through it.
Exactly. It is a holistic approach aimed at total economic and social self-sufficiency.
The EBCI's Native Employment Works program, or New W, illustrates this perfectly.
Oh, the New W program is fantastic.
They understand that securing a job offer is only the first hurdle. The New W program provides work stipends to cover the initial gap before the first paycheck.
Which is a huge barrier for a lot of people.
Massive. They also offer travel reimbursements for members who lack reliable transportation. They physically purchase the necessary work gear and specialized tools required for trades.
Right.
They even provide childcare assistance, removing one of the largest barriers for working parents.
And the educational support is relentless, too. If you look at the EBCI TERO calendar covering January through April of 2026, almost every single week features scheduled GED classes.
Really? Every week?
Yeah, they offer sessions on Wednesday afternoons and Thursday mornings, complete with provided online Microsoft Teams links for accessibility.
The Cherokee Nation Career Services documents reflect the same massive umbrella of support.
They do.
Their TERO office intentionally coordinates with programs for vocational rehabilitation, dedicated reentry services for justice-involved individuals trying to rebuild their lives, and targeted youth programs.
The entire apparatus recognizes that asserting employment rights against outside corporations is utterly meaningless unless you simultaneously cultivate a healthy, employable, and supported workforce to actually exercise those rights.
It is a masterclass in how a sovereign entity builds a self-sustaining ecosystem from the ground up.
It truly is.
Over the course of this deep dive, we watched how tribes take dense legal codes and Supreme Court precedents like Morton v. Mancari and turn them into actionable leverage.
Right.
We saw how they utilize forensic-level corporate auditing, sophisticated tax preemption, and 10-year buyout rules to fight off fraudulent front companies.
And ultimately, we saw how they use the proceeds of that leverage to fund profound community healing, addiction recovery, and relentless educational support. The TERO system completely flips the traditional script of corporate resource extraction. By weaponizing their inherent sovereignty, these tribal nations ensure that the capital generated on their land actively nourishes the community rather than simply passing through it.
So the next time you are driving past a reservation and you see a massive construction site, a new energy project, or a pipeline being laid down, you will know exactly what is happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, there's a lot more going on than meets the eye.
You will know that there is an invisible, highly sophisticated legal framework actively operating, ensuring that the local community isn't just a bystander watching the corporate trucks roll by, but the primary beneficiary of every single dollar generated on their land.
It forces the massive corporations to leave the community stronger than they found it.
Which leaves me with a final provocative thought.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have seen how a strict 51% local ownership requirement, hyper-localized hiring preferences, and keeping corporate compliance fees inside the community can completely transform the economic destiny of a sovereign tribe.
Right.
So if you look at the countless struggling non-tribal rural towns across the country, towns that constantly watch massive corporations extract their natural resources while leaving nothing behind but broken roads, you really have to wonder.
Wonder what?
Could similar hyper-local legal frameworks be the key to saving them? If David can build a sustainable, self-funded force field against Goliath on tribal lands, perhaps it is time for other small towns to start studying the blueprints.